Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that Portland Police Bureau officers frequently encounter situations where information relevant to an investigation is obtained through various means. Considering the legal and ethical obligations specific to Oregon law and PPB policy, which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach when an officer obtains potentially crucial information about a suspect's activities? Option A. Immediately disseminate the information to all officers working on related cases to ensure widespread awareness and potential corroboration. Option B. Document the source and nature of the information, verify its accuracy through independent means where feasible, and ensure its use is strictly limited to the authorized scope of the current investigation, adhering to all PPB dissemination protocols. Option C. Accept the information at face value and proceed with investigative actions based solely on its content without further verification. Option D. Utilize the information to initiate unrelated inquiries or to inform other officers about the suspect's personal life, even if not directly pertinent to the current investigation. Correct answer is B. Document the source and nature of the information, verify its accuracy through independent means where feasible, and ensure its use is strictly limited to the authorized scope of the current investigation, adhering to all PPB dissemination protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act swiftly, but also within the bounds of Oregon law and Portland Police Bureau, PPB policy, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive personal information obtained during an investigation. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach that prioritizes legal compliance and investigative integrity. This means meticulously documenting the source of the information, verifying its accuracy through independent means where possible, and ensuring that any use of the information is directly relevant to the ongoing investigation and authorized by PPB policy and Oregon statutes. Specifically, this approach requires officers to adhere to established protocols for information gathering and dissemination, ensuring that information is only shared with authorized personnel for legitimate investigative purposes. This aligns with the PPB's commitment to lawful and ethical policing, as well as Oregon's legal framework governing evidence and privacy. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately sharing the obtained information broadly with other officers without a clear, documented investigative need. This failure violates principles of information security and privacy, potentially exposing sensitive details unnecessarily and contravening PPB policies on data handling and dissemination. It also risks contaminating the investigation by introducing unverified or improperly obtained information into the broader investigative process. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the information without any attempt at independent verification, especially if the source is questionable or the information is critical to a significant decision. This can lead to investigations based on false premises, potentially resulting in wrongful accusations or the overlooking of crucial evidence. It demonstrates a lack of critical thinking and adherence to sound investigative methodology, which is a cornerstone of professional policing. A third incorrect approach is to use the information for purposes outside the scope of the immediate investigation, such as personal curiosity, or to gain leverage in unrelated matters. This constitutes a serious ethical breach and a violation of departmental policy, undermining the integrity of the investigation and the officer's professional conduct. It also exposes the officer and the Bureau to significant legal and disciplinary repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes legality, necessity, and proportionality. When encountering potentially valuable information, officers should first assess its relevance to the current investigation. They must then consider the legal and policy implications of obtaining and using that information, including privacy concerns and the need for proper authorization. Documentation is paramount at every stage. If verification is possible and necessary, it should be undertaken. Any dissemination must be strictly limited to those with a legitimate need to know for investigative purposes, and the information's use must remain within the defined scope of the investigation. This structured approach ensures accountability, upholds legal standards, and maintains the integrity of law enforcement operations. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Portland Police Bureau officers responding to a traffic stop in Portland, Oregon, detect a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The occupants appear nervous. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officers? Option A. Conduct a full search of the vehicle and its occupants based on the odor of marijuana and the occupant's demeanor. Option B. Seize the vehicle pending a full investigation into potential drug-related offenses. Option C. Secure the scene, meticulously document all observations, and immediately contact the appropriate specialized units for further investigation. Option D. Immediately arrest all occupants of the vehicle due to the perceived illicit activity. The correct answer is C. Secure the scene, meticulously document all observations, and immediately contact the appropriate specialized units for further investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain public trust. Officers must act decisively while adhering strictly to established protocols and constitutional protections. The potential for misinterpretation of evidence or overreach in investigative tactics necessitates a measured and legally sound approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and evidence, securing the scene to prevent contamination, and immediately contacting the appropriate specialized units, such as the Portland Police Bureau's detectives or forensic specialists, to conduct a thorough and lawful investigation. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the integrity of the investigation by ensuring that evidence is collected and processed by trained professionals in accordance with Oregon law and constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. It respects the chain of custody and maximizes the admissibility of evidence in court. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a broad search of the vehicle without probable cause or a warrant, based solely on the odor of marijuana, would be an ethical and regulatory failure. While Oregon law has decriminalized certain amounts of marijuana, probable cause for a search still requires more than just the odor, especially given the legal status. This could lead to a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Oregon's own search and seizure laws. Immediately arresting the occupants based on the odor alone, without further evidence of illegal activity beyond the decriminalized possession of marijuana, would be premature and potentially unlawful. Arrests require probable cause that a crime has been committed, and the odor of marijuana in isolation may not meet this threshold under current Oregon statutes for possession of small amounts. Confiscating the vehicle based on the odor of marijuana, without any evidence of drug trafficking or other criminal activity associated with the vehicle, would be an overreach. Asset forfeiture laws typically require a stronger nexus to criminal activity than the mere presence of a legal substance's odor. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal standards and departmental policies. This involves assessing the situation based on observable facts and articulable suspicion, rather than assumptions. When in doubt about the legality of an action or the presence of probable cause, officers should err on the side of caution and consult with supervisors or specialized units. The priority is always to uphold constitutional rights and legal procedures while effectively investigating potential criminal activity. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that immediate, decisive action is often necessary, but the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, must also adhere to strict protocols for evidence preservation. When responding to a call involving a potential crime scene where evidence may be present, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for an officer to take to balance immediate safety and effective investigation? Option A. Wait for specialized units to arrive before taking any action to secure the scene, to ensure all procedures are followed by experts. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the scene to prevent unauthorized access and contamination, and conduct a preliminary assessment of the situation to identify immediate safety concerns and potential evidence. Option C. Immediately enter the premises to apprehend any individuals present and gather initial witness statements, without first establishing a secure perimeter. Option D. Focus solely on de-escalating any immediate conflict, and address evidence preservation only after all individuals have been safely removed from the area. The correct answer is B. Secure the perimeter of the scene to prevent unauthorized access and contamination, and conduct a preliminary assessment of the situation to identify immediate safety concerns and potential evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for public safety and evidence preservation with the rights of individuals and the procedural requirements of the Portland Police Bureau, PPB. Officers must make rapid decisions under pressure, often with incomplete information, while adhering to established protocols and legal standards. The potential for misinterpretation of evidence or improper handling can have significant consequences for investigations and legal proceedings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene to preserve potential evidence and prevent further contamination or loss, while simultaneously initiating a preliminary assessment to determine the nature of the incident and the immediate safety concerns. This approach aligns with PPB's general orders and Oregon law regarding the preservation of evidence and the lawful execution of duties. It prioritizes the integrity of the investigation by preventing the alteration or destruction of crucial information, thereby supporting a thorough and just outcome. This methodical approach ensures that all necessary steps are taken to gather accurate information without compromising the rights of individuals involved or the chain of custody for evidence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the premises without a clear understanding of the situation or proper authorization, potentially leading to the destruction of evidence, compromising the investigation, and violating the rights of the occupants. This disregards the fundamental principle of scene preservation. Another incorrect approach is to delay securing the scene for an extended period to gather more intelligence, which could allow evidence to be tampered with, lost, or degraded, thereby hindering the investigation and potentially leading to a failure to apprehend responsible parties or gather sufficient evidence for prosecution. This demonstrates a lack of urgency in protecting critical information. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on immediate apprehension of any individuals present, without adequately considering the preservation of the broader scene and potential evidence beyond the immediate individuals, which could lead to a less comprehensive investigation and missed opportunities to gather critical information. This shows a narrow focus that overlooks the holistic investigative process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with assessing immediate threats and safety concerns. This is followed by securing the perimeter to prevent unauthorized access and contamination. Concurrently, a preliminary assessment of the situation should be conducted to determine the nature of the incident and the types of evidence likely present. This structured approach ensures that evidence preservation is prioritized from the outset, while also allowing for the gathering of necessary information to guide further actions in accordance with PPB policy and Oregon law. Question 4. Strategic planning requires the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, to develop protocols for communicating with the public during critical incidents. Considering the need to balance public safety, transparency, and investigative integrity, which approach best guides the PPB's communication strategy when responding to an active threat situation in a public area of Portland, Oregon? Option A. Release confirmed. Verify details about the nature of the threat and any immediate safety precautions the public should take, while withholding specific investigative leads and unconfirmed information. Option B. Provide only information that directly identifies a specific suspect or suspects, without detailing the broader public safety implications of the incident. Option C. Disclose all information gathered by officers on the scene immediately, including speculative details and potential suspect descriptions, to ensure maximum public awareness. Option D. Maintain complete silence and release no information to the public until the entire investigation is concluded and all arrests have been made. Correct answer is A. Release confirmed. Verify details about the nature of the threat and any immediate safety precautions the public should take, while withholding specific investigative leads and unconfirmed information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, to balance the immediate need for public safety information with the ethical and legal obligations to protect sensitive investigative details. Prematurely releasing information could compromise ongoing investigations, endanger individuals involved, or violate privacy rights, while withholding information entirely could erode public trust and hinder community cooperation. Careful judgment is required to determine what information is appropriate for public dissemination at each stage of an incident. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a phased release of information, prioritizing public safety and transparency while safeguarding investigative integrity. This approach aligns with the PPB's commitment to community policing and its duty to inform the public about significant events impacting their safety. Releasing confirmed, verified details about an active threat, such as the nature of the incident and any immediate safety precautions, directly addresses the public's need to know and enables them to take necessary protective measures. This adheres to the ethical principle of providing timely and accurate information to the community while respecting the need to protect ongoing investigations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Releasing all details immediately, including unconfirmed information and specific investigative leads, would be professionally unacceptable. This approach risks compromising the investigation by alerting potential suspects, could lead to the spread of misinformation if details are inaccurate, and may violate the privacy of individuals not directly involved in criminal activity. It fails to uphold the PPB's responsibility to conduct thorough investigations and protect sensitive information. Withholding all information until the investigation is fully concluded, even in cases of immediate public safety concern, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach erodes public trust and can create an environment of fear and speculation. It fails to meet the PPB's obligation to keep the community informed about matters that directly affect their safety and well-being, thereby undermining the principles of transparency and community engagement. Focusing solely on information that directly implicates a specific individual without providing context about the broader public safety implications of the incident is also professionally flawed. While identifying suspects is crucial, the PPB has a primary duty to ensure public safety. Withholding information about an ongoing threat or the general nature of an incident, even if a suspect is identified, leaves the public vulnerable and uninformed about potential risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes public safety, adheres to legal and ethical guidelines regarding information release, and maintains public trust. This involves establishing clear protocols for information dissemination during critical incidents, designating spokespersons, and conducting a risk assessment for each piece of information before release. The framework should emphasize the importance of accuracy, verification, and the timely communication of essential safety information, while respecting the confidentiality required for effective law enforcement. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal that a Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officer, while engaging in community outreach, was approached by a local journalist requesting access to records pertaining to a specific, but not currently active, investigation that occurred within the last year. The officer, concerned about potential public perception and the sensitivity of the information, is unsure how to proceed. Considering Oregon public records law and PPB policy, what is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately refuse to acknowledge the existence of any records related to the investigation, citing the ongoing nature of police work. Option B. Agree to provide the journalist with the requested records on the spot to foster goodwill and demonstrate transparency. Option C. Acknowledge the request. Inform the journalist that the request will be processed according to Oregon public records law and PPB policy, and initiate the internal review process for potential release of information. Option D. Inform the journalist that such requests are not a priority and that the information will only be reviewed if time permits, without a formal process. The correct answer is C. Acknowledge the request. Inform the journalist that the request will be processed according to Oregon public records law and PPB policy, and initiate the internal review process for potential release of information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officer due to the inherent tension between community engagement efforts and the need to maintain public trust and transparency. The officer must balance the desire to foster positive relationships with community members against the strictures of Oregon public records law and PPB policy regarding the handling of sensitive information. Missteps can lead to breaches of privacy, erosion of trust, and potential disciplinary action. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests ethically and legally. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and transparent approach that prioritizes adherence to Oregon public records law and PPB policy. This means acknowledging the request, informing the requester about the process and potential limitations, and then initiating the formal process for reviewing and potentially releasing the information. This approach upholds the principles of transparency and accountability mandated by Oregon, while also respecting the privacy rights of individuals and the operational integrity of the PPB. It demonstrates a commitment to due process and ensures that any release of information is handled in a legally sound and procedurally correct manner. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately refusing to acknowledge the existence of any such records or the request itself. This failure to engage with the request, even if the records are ultimately exempt, violates the spirit of public records access and can be perceived as obstructive and lacking transparency. It directly contravenes the Oregon Public Records Act's intent to provide public access to government records, unless specific exemptions apply. Another incorrect approach is to agree to release the information without proper review or consideration of potential exemptions. This bypasses the legally mandated review process and could result in the disclosure of sensitive or exempt information, violating privacy rights and potentially compromising ongoing investigations or the safety of individuals. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and PPB policy. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the request as trivial or not worth the effort, without following established procedures. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a failure to recognize the legal rights of the requester. It also ignores the potential for even seemingly minor information to be subject to public records laws and the importance of consistent application of policy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the legal and policy landscape governing their actions. In this case, the Oregon Public Records Act and PPB policies are paramount. When faced with a request, the first step is to acknowledge it and understand its scope. Then, initiate the established procedural steps for review, consulting with supervisors or legal counsel if necessary. Transparency with the requester about the process, including potential timelines and exemptions, is crucial. The decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance, ethical conduct, and the preservation of public trust. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that a member of the public has submitted a formal public records request to the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, seeking access to all dispatch logs and initial incident reports related to a specific, ongoing high-profile investigation. Given the sensitive nature of the investigation and the potential for public scrutiny, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the PPB to take in response to this request under Oregon law? Option A. Deny the request outright, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation without conducting any specific review of the records or applicable exemptions. Option B. Advise the requesting party that only information approved by the officers directly involved in the investigation can be released, without consulting departmental policy or legal counsel. Option C. Immediately release all dispatch logs and initial incident reports as requested to ensure maximum transparency and public access to information. Option D. Initiate a formal review process to assess the request against PPB policies and relevant provisions of the Oregon Public Records Law, identifying any applicable exemptions that may permit the withholding of specific information to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation or individual privacy. Correct answer is D. Initiate a formal review process to assess the request against PPB policies and relevant provisions of the Oregon Public Records Law, identifying any applicable exemptions that may permit the withholding of specific information to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation or individual privacy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Portland Police Bureau, PPB, officers due to the inherent tension between the public's right to information and the need to protect the integrity of ongoing investigations and the privacy of individuals involved. Balancing transparency with investigative necessities requires careful judgment, adherence to established protocols, and an understanding of Oregon public records law and PPB policy. Missteps can lead to legal challenges, erosion of public trust, and compromise of law enforcement efforts. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and policy-driven response. This approach prioritizes a thorough review of the request against established PPB policies and relevant Oregon public records statutes. It acknowledges the request but mandates a formal process to determine what information, if any, can be released without jeopardizing the investigation or violating privacy rights. This aligns with the PPB's commitment to accountability and transparency, while upholding legal obligations and operational integrity. The PPB is bound by Oregon's public records law, which generally presumes that public records are accessible, but also outlines specific exemptions that allow for the withholding of certain information, such as that which would interfere with a law enforcement investigation or disclose confidential informant details. Adhering to this review process ensures compliance with these statutes and internal directives. Incorrect approach is analysis. Releasing all requested information immediately without review fails to consider potential exemptions under Oregon public records law. This could include information that, if disclosed, would impede an ongoing investigation, reveal sensitive personal details of victims or witnesses, or compromise the safety of individuals. Such a release would violate both legal requirements and PPB policy designed to protect investigative integrity and privacy. Refusing to acknowledge the request outright, without any attempt to review or consult policy, demonstrates a lack of responsiveness and potentially a disregard for public access rights. While exemptions may apply, a blanket refusal without proper evaluation is procedurally unsound and can lead to accusations of obstruction and a breakdown in public trust. It bypasses the established mechanisms for handling public records requests. Consulting only with the involved officers without referencing official PPB policy or legal counsel is insufficient. While officer input is valuable, the decision to release or withhold public records must be guided by established legal frameworks and departmental procedures, not solely by the immediate perspectives of those directly involved in the case. This approach risks overlooking broader legal implications and policy requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the nature of the request and its potential implications. This involves consulting relevant policies and legal statutes, seeking guidance from appropriate supervisors or legal advisors when necessary, and documenting all decisions and actions taken. The goal is to achieve a balance between transparency and the protection of legitimate interests, ensuring all actions are legally defensible and ethically sound. Question 7. Governance review demonstrates that the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, requires access to sensitive data held by another municipal agency to investigate a credible threat to public safety. What is the most appropriate course of action for an officer to take in Portland, Oregon to obtain this information? Option A. Wait for the other agency to proactively share the information, as they may become aware of the threat independently. Option B. Attempt to obtain the information through informal contacts within the other agency, bypassing official channels. Option C. Initiate a formal interagency data sharing request through the established PPB and Oregon state protocols, clearly documenting the investigative need and seeking supervisory approval. Option D. Directly access the data from the other agency's system without formal authorization, citing the urgency of the public safety threat. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal interagency data sharing request through the established PPB and Oregon state protocols, clearly documenting the investigative need and seeking supervisory approval. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the established legal and ethical obligations regarding privacy and data access. The Portland Police Bureau, PPB, must act decisively, but also within the bounds of Oregon law and established departmental policies. Failure to do so could lead to legal repercussions, erosion of public trust, and compromised investigations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal request through the established interagency data sharing protocols, as outlined by Oregon revised statutes and PPB policy. This approach ensures that data is accessed legally, with appropriate oversight and documentation. It respects the privacy rights of individuals and maintains the integrity of the investigation by adhering to established procedures for obtaining sensitive information. This process typically involves a supervisor's approval and a clear articulation of the investigative need, aligning with the principles of lawful access and due process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly accessing the data without following the established interagency request process. This bypasses necessary oversight and legal authorization, potentially violating Oregon revised statutes related to data privacy and unauthorized access to information. It undermines the principle of lawful data acquisition and could render the obtained information inadmissible in any subsequent legal proceedings. Another incorrect approach is to delay the investigation indefinitely due to perceived bureaucratic hurdles in the data request process. While adherence to procedure is crucial, an unreasonable delay in responding to a credible public safety threat is ethically problematic and could have severe consequences. This approach fails to balance procedural requirements with the imperative to protect the public. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal, unauthorized channels to obtain the information. This not only circumvents established protocols, but also introduces significant risks of data inaccuracy, compromised chain of custody, and potential ethical breaches by the individuals providing the information. It erodes accountability and can lead to serious legal and disciplinary consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes lawful and ethical conduct while ensuring operational effectiveness. This involves understanding the relevant legal framework, Oregon revised statutes governing data access and privacy, departmental policies, and ethical guidelines. When faced with a situation requiring external data, the first step should be to identify the appropriate channels for requesting that data. If existing protocols seem inefficient but are legally sound, the focus should be on utilizing them effectively, perhaps by escalating the request through supervisory channels if urgency is paramount. If protocols are unclear or inadequate, the professional should seek clarification from legal counsel or supervisors before proceeding. The ultimate goal is to obtain necessary information through legitimate means that protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of the investigation and the organization. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that officers of the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, are often faced with situations where personal acquaintances are involved in minor infractions. If a PPB officer observes a known acquaintance committing a minor traffic violation while on duty in Portland, Oregon, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold both professional integrity and community trust? Option A. Immediately issue a citation for the violation without any further assessment to demonstrate strict impartiality and avoid any perception of favoritism. Option B. Issue a verbal warning to the acquaintance without further investigation, citing the personal relationship as a reason for leniency, and allow them to proceed. Option C. Conduct a standard, unbiased investigation of the traffic violation, document all observations and actions meticulously, and take appropriate enforcement action as dictated by Oregon revised statutes and PPB policy, while ensuring the interaction remains professional and objective. Option D. Politely inform the acquaintance of the violation and advise them to be more careful in the future, without taking any formal enforcement action or documenting the interaction. The correct answer is C. Conduct a standard, unbiased investigation of the traffic violation, document all observations and actions meticulously, and take appropriate enforcement action as dictated by Oregon revised statutes and PPB policy, while ensuring the interaction remains professional and objective. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau, PPB, officer due to the inherent tension between community engagement and the need for impartial enforcement of Oregon laws. The officer must navigate the potential for perceived bias or favoritism while upholding their duty to serve and protect all members of the Portland community. Balancing personal relationships with professional obligations requires careful judgment and adherence to established ethical guidelines and departmental policies. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a transparent and objective approach that prioritizes the integrity of the law enforcement process. This means acknowledging the relationship, but ensuring it does not influence or appear to influence the officer's actions. The officer should proceed with a standard, unbiased investigation, documenting all observations and actions meticulously, and if probable cause exists, taking appropriate enforcement action as dictated by Oregon revised statutes and PPB policy. This approach upholds the principle of equal treatment under the law and maintains public trust by demonstrating that no individual is above scrutiny, regardless of personal connections. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves overlooking the potential infraction due to the personal relationship. This failure violates the ethical obligation to enforce laws impartially and could be construed as favoritism or dereliction of duty under PPB policy and Oregon law. It erodes public trust and sets a dangerous precedent. Another incorrect approach is to immediately issue a warning or dismiss the situation without proper investigation, solely based on the personal connection. This bypasses the established procedures for traffic enforcement and investigation, potentially undermining the credibility of the PPB and violating the principle of consistent application of the law. A third incorrect approach is to escalate the situation unnecessarily or to be overly punitive due to an unconscious bias to prove impartiality. This can lead to an unprofessional interaction, potentially violating the individual's rights and creating a negative perception of the PPB, even if the intent was to appear unbiased. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objectivity, fairness, and adherence to policy and law. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, however minor, and taking proactive steps to mitigate them. The framework should include 1. Objective observation and assessment of the situation. 2. Strict adherence to departmental policies and relevant Oregon statutes. 3. Thorough and impartial documentation of all facts and actions. 4. Consultation with a supervisor if any doubt exists regarding the appropriate course of action or if a conflict of interest is present. 5. Maintaining professional demeanor and communication throughout the interaction. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that during a permitted protest in downtown Portland, Oregon, a group of participants has begun to block a key intersection, causing significant traffic disruption. While the protest itself is lawful, the intersection blockage is not explicitly covered by the permit and is causing considerable public inconvenience. A Portland Police Bureau officer observes this situation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Attempt to communicate with the protest organizers to understand their intentions and explain the concerns regarding the intersection blockage, seeking voluntary compliance to clear the intersection or relocate the activity. Option B. Use physical force to clear the intersection of protesters, as the disruption to public order and traffic is deemed unacceptable. Option C. Immediately issue a dispersal order to the entire group of protesters, citing the traffic disruption as grounds for immediate termination of the assembly. Option D. Focus efforts on rerouting traffic around the blocked intersection, effectively accepting the blockage as a consequence of the protest and prioritizing traffic flow management. The correct answer is A. Attempt to communicate with the protest organizers to understand their intentions and explain the concerns regarding the intersection blockage, seeking voluntary compliance to clear the intersection or relocate the activity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officer due to the inherent tension between maintaining public order and respecting individual rights during a protest. The officer must navigate the complexities of crowd management, potential escalation, and the legal boundaries of free speech and assembly, all while adhering to PPB policies and Oregon state law. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are lawful, ethical, and proportionate to the situation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation by clearly communicating with the protest organizers and participants about the specific behavior causing concern and the legal basis for any potential intervention. This approach prioritizes dialogue and understanding, seeking voluntary compliance before resorting to enforcement. It aligns with PPB's commitment to community policing principles and the legal framework in Oregon that protects the right to peaceful assembly, while also acknowledging the limitations on such rights when they infringe upon public safety or the rights of others. This proactive communication aims to resolve the issue with minimal disruption and without unnecessary use of force, reflecting a commitment to de-escalation and constitutional rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately issuing dispersal orders to the entire group, without attempting to identify or engage with protest leaders or understand the specific nature of the alleged disturbance. This fails to distinguish between lawful protest activity and any potentially unlawful behavior, potentially infringing on the rights of peaceful demonstrators and escalating tensions unnecessarily. It bypasses opportunities for de-escalation and could be seen as an overly broad and potentially unconstitutional response. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the perceived inconvenience to traffic without adequately considering the protected nature of the protest. While traffic flow is a concern, it does not automatically override the right to assemble. Prioritizing traffic management above all else, without a clear and present danger to public safety or a violation of specific ordinances that cannot be mitigated through less restrictive means, would be a failure to uphold constitutional protections. A third incorrect approach is to use force to disperse the crowd based on a subjective feeling of unease or a minor, non-threatening obstruction. This lacks the objective justification required by law and PPB policy for the use of force. It risks violating individuals' rights and could lead to significant legal and disciplinary repercussions for the officer. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a tiered approach to managing public gatherings. This begins with observation and assessment, followed by communication and engagement with organizers to understand their intentions and address any concerns. If specific violations of law or PPB policy are identified, the response should be proportionate, targeting only the individuals or activities in violation, and employing the least restrictive means necessary. De-escalation techniques and clear, lawful directives should be prioritized before considering enforcement actions, always mindful of constitutional rights and departmental guidelines. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Portland or Police Bureau PPB is facing increased demand for services and a persistent staffing deficit. If the average overtime per officer per month over the past year was 15 hours, the average hourly rate for overtime, including benefits, is $75. There are currently 100 officers, and a local festival is projected to increase calls for service by 5%. While the Bureau is operating with a deficit of 10 officers, what is the most accurate projected overtime expenditure for the upcoming month, assuming these factors are constant? And how does this compare to the allocated overtime budget of $120,000? Option A. The projected overtime expenditure is approximately $136,687.50, indicating a shortfall of $16,687.50 compared to the allocated budget. Option B. The projected overtime expenditure is $125,437.50, indicating a shortfall of $5,437.50 compared to the allocated budget. Option C. The projected overtime expenditure is $150,000, indicating a shortfall of $30,000 compared to the allocated budget. Option D. The projected overtime expenditure is $112,500, which is within the allocated budget. The correct answer is A. The projected overtime expenditure is approximately $136,687.50, indicating a shortfall of $16,687.50 compared to the allocated budget. Explanation. Benchmark analysis indicates that effective resource allocation is paramount for the Portland or Police Bureau PPB to meet its public safety mandates within budgetary constraints. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic planning, requiring careful judgment to ensure both fiscal responsibility and public service delivery. The PPB must navigate the complexities of unpredictable demand for services, personnel availability, and the financial implications of overtime. The best approach involves a proactive and data-driven method of forecasting overtime needs based on historical trends, anticipated events, and staffing levels. This method allows for more accurate budget forecasting and resource allocation. Specifically, by analyzing the average overtime hours per officer per month over the past year, factoring in a 5% projected increase in calls for service due to a local festival, and considering the current staffing deficit of 10 officers, the PPB can project its overtime expenditure. If the average overtime is 15 hours per officer per month, and the hourly rate including benefits is $75, then for the 100 officers, the base monthly overtime cost is 100 backslash text officers backslash times 15 backslash text hours slash officer backslash times backslash $75 slash big slash text hour equals backslash $112, 500 backslash. With a 5% increase in calls and a 10 officer deficit, projected overtime for the next month would be approximately backslash 100 backslash text officers backslash times 15 backslash text hours backslash times 105 backslash times backslash $75 slash big slash text hour plus 10 backslash text officers backslash times 15 backslash text hours backslash times backslash $75 slash big slash text hour equals backslash $125, 437. 50 plus backslash $11, 250 equals backslash $136, 687. 50 backslash. This projection, when compared against the allocated overtime budget of $120,000, highlights a potential shortfall of $16,687. 50, necessitating a review of staffing or budget adjustments. This aligns with principles of sound financial management and operational efficiency, ensuring that resources are utilized effectively to meet public safety demands without unnecessary expenditure or compromising service levels. An incorrect approach would be to simply allocate the remaining overtime budget based on a perceived immediate need, without a systematic analysis of historical data and future projections. This reactive method fails to account for the cumulative impact of staffing shortages and increased demand, leading to potential budget overruns and an inability to cover essential services during peak periods. It lacks the foresight required for responsible fiscal stewardship. Another incorrect approach would be to rigidly adhere to the current overtime budget, forcing officers to work fewer overtime hours regardless of operational necessity. This could lead to understaffing during critical incidents, increased stress on existing personnel, and a decline in public safety, violating the PPB's core mission. It prioritizes budget adherence over effective service delivery. A further incorrect approach would be to request an immediate budget increase based on a vague assertion of increased workload without providing a detailed, data-backed justification. This lacks professionalism and accountability, as it does not demonstrate a thorough analysis of the situation or explore all possible internal solutions before seeking external financial adjustments. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Data collection and analysis. Gather historical overtime data, call volume trends and staffing levels. 2. Predictive modeling. Use this data to forecast future overtime needs, considering known events and potential challenges. 3. Budgetary review. Compare projected needs against the allocated budget. 4. Strategic planning. Develop strategies to mitigate shortfalls, which may include adjustments to staffing, operational procedures, or budget requests with strong justification. 5. Communication and justification. Clearly communicate findings and recommendations to relevant stakeholders, supported by data. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that Portland Police Bureau officers are often tasked with managing public demonstrations. During a protest in downtown Portland, an officer observes a large group of individuals holding signs and chanting slogans. While the majority appear to be peacefully assembling, a few individuals at the edge of the crowd are shouting aggressively at passers-by and attempting to block a sidewalk. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer? Option A. Observe the protest, identify specific individuals engaging in potentially unlawful behavior, and communicate these observations to a supervisor and relevant units for assessment and potential coordinated response. Option B. Approach the edge of the crowd and aggressively question individuals holding signs, demanding to know their intentions and affiliations. Option C. Immediately issue a dispersal order to the entire crowd, citing the general disruption caused by the protest. Option D. Ignore the protest as long as no immediate physical violence is occurring, and continue with routine patrol duties. The correct answer is A. Observe the protest, identify specific individuals engaging in potentially unlawful behavior, and communicate these observations to a supervisor and relevant units for assessment and potential coordinated response. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officer due to the inherent tension between community engagement and the need to maintain public order and safety during a potentially disruptive protest. The officer must balance the rights of individuals to assemble and express their views with the responsibility to prevent unlawful activity and ensure the safety of all involved, including protesters, bystanders, and other officers. Misjudging the situation or misapplying PPB policy could lead to escalation, civil rights violations, or a breakdown in public trust. Careful judgment is required to de-escalate, gather information, and respond appropriately within established legal and policy frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and information-gathering approach. This means observing the protest, identifying potential agitators or unlawful activities without immediate intervention unless a clear and present danger exists, and communicating observations to supervisors and relevant units. This approach aligns with PPB's commitment to community policing principles, which emphasize building trust and understanding through observation and communication rather than immediate confrontation. It also adheres to the legal standard of requiring reasonable suspicion or probable cause before taking enforcement action, thereby protecting civil liberties and ensuring that interventions are justified and proportionate. This allows for a more informed and strategic response, minimizing unnecessary force and potential for escalation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately issuing dispersal orders to all participants based solely on the presence of signs and chanting. This fails to distinguish between lawful protest and unlawful activity, potentially infringing on the First Amendment rights of peaceful demonstrators. It bypasses the necessary observation and assessment phase and assumes guilt by association, which is contrary to due process principles and PPB's community engagement goals. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely and not document or report any observations. This abdication of duty is professionally unacceptable. It fails to provide essential situational awareness to command staff, hindering effective resource allocation and response planning. It also neglects the PPB's responsibility to monitor public events and ensure public safety, potentially allowing unlawful activities to go unchecked. A third incorrect approach is to engage in aggressive questioning and intimidation of protesters without any indication of unlawful behavior. This can be perceived as harassment and can escalate tensions, turning a peaceful assembly into a confrontational situation. It undermines the principles of community policing and can damage the relationship between the PPB and the community it serves, violating ethical standards of professional conduct and respect for individual rights. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, assessment, and communication. This involves understanding the context of the situation, identifying specific behaviors that may violate laws or policies, and consulting with supervisors and relevant units before taking significant action. The framework should also include a strong emphasis on de-escalation techniques and the protection of constitutional rights. When faced with uncertainty, the default should be to gather more information and seek guidance, rather than to act impulsively or to ignore the situation. Question 12. The control framework reveals that a Portland Police Bureau officer observes an individual loitering near a recently burglarized business, matching a general description of a suspect. The officer approaches the individual to investigate. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to balance investigative needs with the individual's rights under Oregon law? Option A. Immediately demand the individual's identification and instruct them to remain in place, stating that they are a suspect in the burglary and will be detained until the investigation is complete. Option B. Detain the individual based on the general description and the proximity to the crime scene, without articulating specific facts that link the individual to the burglary, and proceed to question them about their whereabouts. Option C. Initiate a casual conversation about the weather and the neighborhood, hoping to gather information indirectly without explicitly stating any suspicion of criminal activity. Option D. Inform the individual that they have a reasonable suspicion they are involved in the recent burglary based on specific observations and the general description. Explain the basis for this suspicion, and ask if they are willing to answer questions or provide identification, while making it clear they are not under arrest and are free to leave if they choose not to cooperate. The correct answer is D. Inform the individual that they have a reasonable suspicion they are involved in the recent burglary based on specific observations and the general description. Explain the basis for this suspicion, and ask if they are willing to answer questions or provide identification, while making it clear they are not under arrest and are free to leave if they choose not to cooperate. Explanation: the control framework reveals a scenario where a Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officer must balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Oregon law and PPB policy regarding citizen interactions, specifically when an officer has a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity but not probable cause for arrest. The officer must act decisively to investigate potential wrongdoing without infringing upon an individual's liberty or privacy beyond what is legally permissible. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a consensual encounter, a lawful investigative stop, Terry stop, and an unlawful detention. The best professional practice involves approaching the individual in a manner that clearly communicates the officer's intent and the basis for their suspicion, while also respecting the individual's right to refuse further interaction if the suspicion does not escalate to probable cause. This approach involves the officer stating they have a reasonable suspicion that the individual is involved in a specific criminal activity, explaining the articulable facts supporting this suspicion, and then asking if the individual is willing to answer questions or provide identification. This respects the individual's autonomy and ensures that any subsequent detention or search is based on a legally sound foundation. This aligns with Oregon's constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and PPB's internal policies on citizen encounters and reasonable suspicion. An incorrect approach would be to immediately demand identification and detain the individual without articulating specific, objective facts that lead to a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This constitutes an unlawful detention, violating the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Oregon's equivalent protections. Another incorrect approach is to engage in a purely consensual conversation without any indication of suspicion, which could later be misconstrued as an attempt to gather information under the guise of a lawful stop, thereby misleading the individual and potentially creating a false sense of obligation to cooperate. Finally, an approach that involves making assumptions or relying on hunches rather than articulable facts to justify the stop is also professionally unacceptable, as it undermines the principle of objective justification required for any police action that infringes upon individual liberties. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, assess the totality of the circumstances to determine if reasonable suspicion exists for a specific criminal activity. Second, if reasonable suspicion is present, articulate those specific facts clearly and concisely. Third, communicate the basis for the suspicion to the individual and clearly state that they are not under arrest and are free to leave if they do not wish to cooperate, unless the suspicion escalates to probable cause. Fourth, document the encounter thoroughly, including the articulable facts supporting the suspicion and the individual's response. Question 13. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported use of force incidents by Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officers over the past quarter, particularly in low-income neighborhoods. Considering the PPB's operational framework within Oregon law and its commitment to community relations, which of the following actions best addresses this concerning trend? Option A. Mandate additional mandatory overtime for all officers in the affected precincts to increase their presence and perceived authority. Option B. Increase uniformed officer patrols in the identified neighborhoods and issue public statements emphasizing strict enforcement of all laws to deter further incidents. Option C. Reclassify the increase in use of force incidents as a statistical fluctuation and await further data before initiating any internal review or external communication. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of use of force data, conduct targeted community outreach in affected neighborhoods, and solicit feedback from both residents and officers to identify contributing factors and inform potential policy or training adjustments. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive review of use of force data, conduct targeted community outreach in affected neighborhoods, and solicit feedback from both residents and officers to identify contributing factors and inform potential policy or training adjustments. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported use of force incidents by Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officers over the past quarter, particularly in low-income neighborhoods. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to maintain public safety and officer safety with the need for accountability, transparency, and equitable application of force. The PPB operates under the authority of Oregon state law and various federal guidelines, including those related to constitutional policing and civil rights. Careful judgment is required to interpret these metrics, understand the underlying causes, and implement appropriate interventions without compromising legitimate law enforcement functions. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the use of force data, coupled with direct engagement with community members and officers in the affected areas. This approach is correct because it aligns with the PPB's commitment to community policing principles and the ethical obligation to address potential systemic issues. Specifically, Oregon law and PPB policy mandate thorough investigations into use of force incidents and require the Bureau to be responsive to community concerns. Engaging with stakeholders allows for a nuanced understanding of the factors contributing to the increase, such as changes in crime patterns, officer training needs, or community relations, thereby enabling targeted and effective solutions. This proactive and collaborative strategy fosters trust and ensures that policy and training adjustments are informed by real-world experiences and community perspectives. An approach that focuses solely on increasing officer presence and issuing stern warnings to the community is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the root causes of the increased use of force and can exacerbate community tensions, potentially leading to further distrust and increased conflict. It neglects the ethical responsibility to investigate the circumstances surrounding each use of force incident and to implement evidence-based interventions. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the data as a temporary anomaly without further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to uphold the PPB's duty to monitor its operations and respond to concerning trends. It ignores the potential for bias or policy violations and misses an opportunity to improve policing practices, which is a core ethical and legal obligation. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, data analysis to identify trends and patterns. Second, investigation into individual incidents to ensure policy compliance and identify best practices or areas for improvement. Third, community engagement to understand perceptions and gather feedback. And fourth, collaboration with internal affairs and training divisions to develop and implement appropriate policy or training adjustments. This systematic and inclusive process ensures that responses are data-driven, ethically sound, and aligned with the PPB's mission and legal obligations. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual access pattern to sensitive citizen data within the Portland Police Bureau's network. As an officer responsible for system integrity, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to uphold the privacy rights of Portland residents and comply with Oregon state law? Option A. Inform only your direct supervisor about the alert and await further instructions without taking any immediate investigative steps. Option B. Dismiss the alert as a potential system error and continue normal operations, assuming no actual breach has occurred. Option C. Delete the system logs associated with the unusual access pattern to prevent any potential misuse of the data by unauthorized personnel. Option D. Immediately initiate a detailed investigation into the access pattern. Document all findings, report the incident to internal affairs and legal counsel, and review system logs for further anomalies and security vulnerabilities. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a detailed investigation into the access pattern, document all findings, report the incident to internal affairs and legal counsel, and review system logs for further anomalies and security vulnerabilities. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of privacy and civil liberties, making this scenario professionally challenging. Officers must balance the need for effective law enforcement and public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals. The Portland Police Bureau, PPB, operates under the framework of Oregon state law and federal constitutional protections, particularly the Fourth Amendment, which guards against unreasonable searches and seizures. The use of surveillance technology, even for legitimate purposes, requires careful consideration of privacy expectations and the potential for misuse. The best approach involves immediate and thorough investigation of the unauthorized access, focusing on identifying the source and scope of the breach, and implementing corrective measures to prevent future occurrences. This aligns with the PPB's duty to uphold the law and protect citizens' rights. Specifically, it requires adherence to Oregon Revised Statutes, ORS, concerning privacy and data security, as well as PPB internal policies on evidence handling and digital forensics. Promptly reporting the incident to relevant internal affairs and legal counsel ensures compliance with reporting protocols and allows for expert guidance on legal obligations and potential liabilities. Furthermore, a comprehensive review of access logs and security protocols is essential to understand the vulnerability and strengthen defenses, thereby demonstrating a commitment to responsible data stewardship and constitutional compliance. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the alert, assuming it might be a false positive or a minor technical glitch. This failure to investigate directly contravenes the PPB's responsibility to ensure the integrity of its systems and protect sensitive information. It risks allowing a potential security breach to go unaddressed, which could lead to unauthorized access to confidential data, violating ORS privacy statutes and potentially leading to civil litigation. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately delete the logs associated with the alert without a proper investigation. This action could be construed as an attempt to conceal evidence of a security lapse or misconduct, hindering any subsequent investigation into the breach. It would also prevent the PPB from understanding the full extent of the compromise and identifying the root cause, thereby failing to implement necessary security enhancements and violating principles of accountability and transparency. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to only inform immediate supervisors without escalating the issue to the appropriate internal affairs or legal departments. While informing supervisors is a step, failing to involve specialized units with expertise in privacy law, digital forensics, and internal investigations means the PPB may not be adequately addressing the legal and procedural implications of the breach. This could result in delayed or insufficient remedial actions, potentially exposing the Bureau to legal challenges and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal compliance. This involves a systematic process of identifying potential threats, assessing risks, consulting relevant policies and legal counsel, and implementing proportionate and effective responses. When faced with alerts from monitoring systems, the initial step should always be a thorough, documented investigation, followed by appropriate reporting and remediation, ensuring that all actions are consistent with legal obligation and ethical standards. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a Portland or Police Bureau PPB officer, while investigating a potential public safety threat, believes that a specific individual's personal contact information, held by a third-party service provider, could significantly expedite the investigation. The officer is aware that accessing this information directly from the service provider might be possible through informal channels. Considering Oregon Revised Statutes, ORS, and PPB policy, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the officer? Option A. Submit a formal documented request through established PPB channels, clearly stating the investigative purpose and seeking authorization for obtaining the individual's contact information, in accordance with ORS privacy provisions and PPB policy. Option B. Access the information directly from the service provider through informal means, believing it will expedite the investigation and is a common practice. Option C. Share the belief that the individual's information is needed with a trusted colleague outside the immediate investigative team, asking if they have any informal contacts at the service provider. Option D. Directly contact the individual whose information is sought to inquire about their contact details, explaining the general nature of the investigation. The correct answer is A. Submit a formal, documented request through established PPB channels, clearly stating the investigative purpose and seeking authorization for obtaining the individual's contact information, in accordance with ORS privacy provisions and PPB policy. Explanation. System analysis indicates that the Portland or Police Bureau PPB faces complex situations requiring adherence to Oregon Revised Statutes ORS and established departmental policies, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive information and public trust. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate need for information against the long-term implications of unauthorized disclosure and potential damage to community relations and ongoing investigations. The PPB officer must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing interests while upholding legal and ethical standards. The best approach involves a formal, documented request through established internal channels for the information, coupled with a clear articulation of the legitimate law enforcement purpose. This ensures that the request is reviewed by appropriate supervisors and legal counsel, verifying its necessity and compliance with ORS privacy provisions and PPB policy on information sharing. This method upholds accountability, transparency within the Bureau, and respects the privacy rights of individuals whose information might be accessed. It aligns with the ethical imperative to use law enforcement powers responsibly and within legal boundaries. An approach that involves directly contacting the individual whose information is sought, without prior authorization or a documented investigative need, is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established protocols, potentially violates ORS privacy statutes by disclosing the existence of an investigation or sensitive data prematurely, and erodes public trust by appearing to engage in informal or potentially intrusive information gathering. It also risks compromising any ongoing investigation by alerting the subject. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to share the information with a colleague outside of the immediate investigative team without a clear, documented need-to-know and supervisory approval. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure, potentially violating ORS privacy laws and PPB policy on data security and confidentiality. Such actions can lead to the misuse of sensitive information and damage the integrity of the Bureau's operations. Finally, assuming the information is readily available and can be shared without formal process, simply accessing and relaying it based on a personal belief of its utility is a failure of professional judgment. This disregards the legal framework governing information access and dissemination, including ORS statutes and PPB policies designed to prevent unauthorized access and protect individual privacy. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the serious consequences of mishandling sensitive data. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, adherence to departmental policy, and ethical considerations. This involves understanding the specific ORS provisions related to information access and privacy, consulting internal policies and procedures, seeking supervisory guidance when in doubt, and always documenting actions taken. The core principle is to ensure that all information gathering and sharing is conducted for a legitimate law enforcement purpose, with appropriate authorization and safeguards in place. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that Portland Police Bureau officers are increasingly interacting with community members who wish to lodge formal complaints against fellow officers. In a situation where a citizen approaches you directly, expressing significant dissatisfaction with the conduct of another officer and demanding immediate action, what is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action to ensure both community trust and adherence to PPB policy? Option A. Listen to the citizens' concerns, explain the formal process for filing a complaint, and direct them to the appropriate PPB division responsible for investigating such matters. Option B. Promise the citizen that you will personally look into the matter and ensure the officer in question is reprimanded. Option C. Dismiss the citizens' concerns, stating that you are not involved in such matters and cannot assist them. Option D. Engage in a public discussion with the citizen about the alleged misconduct, offering justifications for the other officer's actions. The correct answer is A. Listen to the citizens' concerns, explain the formal process for filing a complaint, and direct them to the appropriate PPB division responsible for investigating such matters. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau PPB officer due to the inherent tension between community engagement and the need to maintain operational integrity and public trust. The officer must balance the desire to be responsive to citizen concerns with the procedural requirements and ethical obligations governing police conduct. Missteps can lead to erosion of community trust, internal disciplinary action, and potential legal ramifications. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands effectively. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the citizen's concern, informing them of the appropriate procedural steps, and ensuring that the matter is handled through official channels. This approach respects the citizen's right to be heard while upholding the PPB's commitment to due process and accountability. Specifically, directing the citizen to the appropriate internal affairs or complaint division ensures that allegations are formally documented, investigated impartially, and addressed according to established PPB policy and Oregon law. This aligns with the PPB's mission to serve and protect the community with integrity and transparency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the citizen's concerns outright without offering any recourse. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and professionalism, potentially alienating the community and fostering a perception of indifference or cover-up. It fails to uphold the PPB's duty to address citizen grievances and can lead to increased distrust. Another incorrect approach is to promise a specific outcome or to personally investigate the matter outside of official channels. This can create a conflict of interest, compromise the integrity of any subsequent investigation, and potentially expose the officer to liability. Bypasses established protocols designed to ensure fairness and impartiality for all parties involved. A further incorrect approach is to engage in a public debate or to offer a defense of the officer in question without proper authority or information. This can escalate the situation, violate privacy considerations, and undermine the formal investigation process. It also risks misrepresenting facts or making statements that could prejudice an investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to policy, ethical conduct, and community trust. When faced with a citizen complaint, the first step is to listen and acknowledge the concern. The next step is to identify the appropriate procedural pathway for addressing the complaint, which in this case is through the PPB's established complaint intake process. Officers should avoid personal involvement in investigations or disciplinary actions beyond their official duties and should always act with transparency and integrity, guiding citizens towards the correct channels for resolution. Question 17. During the evaluation of a potential crime scene in Portland, Oregon, officers have identified an individual who may possess crucial evidence related to an ongoing investigation. The individual is present at the scene but has not been formally detained. What is the most legally and ethically sound course of action for the Portland Police Bureau officers to pursue in obtaining the evidence from this individual? Option A. Seek a search warrant from a judge based on probable cause that the individual possesses evidence related to the crime. Option B. Detain the individual indefinitely until they voluntarily agree to provide the evidence. Option C. Rely on the individual's presence at the scene to imply consent for a search of their person or belongings. Option D. Conduct a warrantless search of the individual and their belongings, citing the proximity to the crime scene as justification. The correct answer is A. Seek a search warrant from a judge based on probable cause that the individual possesses evidence related to the crime. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act swiftly, but also within the bounds of Oregon law and Portland Police Bureau (PPB) policy. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could compromise an investigation, violate constitutional rights, or lead to the suppression of evidence. The best approach involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This method is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and Oregon-specific legal interpretations of these rights. A warrant, issued by a neutral and detached magistrate, provides the necessary legal authorization for law enforcement to conduct a search or seizure, ensuring that the intrusion is justified by probable cause and is limited in scope. This process respects the individual's right to privacy while enabling the PPB to gather critical evidence for an ongoing investigation. An incorrect approach would be to rely on consent obtained under duress or implied consent due to the individual's presence at the scene. Obtaining consent when an individual is not free to leave or feels compelled to comply due to the presence of law enforcement officers renders the consent involuntary and therefore invalid under Oregon law and constitutional precedent. This failure to secure voluntary consent undermines the legitimacy of any evidence obtained. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a search without any legal basis, such as probable cause or a warrant, simply because the individual is present at a location where a crime has occurred. This constitutes an unlawful search and seizure, violating the Fourth Amendment and Oregon statutes governing searches. Evidence obtained through such means would be inadmissible in court. Finally, an incorrect approach is to delay the investigation significantly to pursue a warrant when exigent circumstances clearly exist and would justify a warrantless search. While warrants are preferred, Oregon law, like federal law, recognizes exceptions to the warrant requirement when immediate action is necessary to prevent the destruction of evidence, escape of a suspect, or danger to the public or officers. Failing to act when exigent circumstances are present can also be a professional failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and constitutional rights. This involves assessing the situation for probable cause, considering the availability of exceptions to the warrant requirement, like exigent circumstances, and always striving to obtain a warrant when feasible. If consent is sought, officers must ensure it is freely and voluntarily given, understanding the nuances of coercion and implied consent. Documentation of all actions and justifications is paramount. Question 18. What factors determine how a Portland Police Bureau officer should respond to a community member inquiring about the details of an ongoing investigation in their neighborhood? Option A. The officer's ability to provide general information about the PPB's role in community safety and direct the inquirer to appropriate channels for official updates, while respecting the confidentiality of the ongoing investigation. Option B. The officer's desire to quickly satisfy the inquirer's curiosity, even if it means sharing preliminary or unconfirmed details of the investigation. Option C. The officer's personal opinion on the likelihood of a suspect's guilt and the perceived urgency of the situation. Option D. The officer's assessment of whether the community member is likely to share the information with others. Correct answer is A. The officer's ability to provide general information about the PPB's role in community safety and direct the inquirer to appropriate channels for official updates, while respecting the confidentiality of the ongoing investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Portland Police Bureau, PPB, officer due to the inherent tension between community trust and the need for effective law enforcement. The officer must balance the public's right to know and their expectation of transparency with the sensitive nature of ongoing investigations and the potential for compromising evidence or witness safety. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could undermine public confidence or hinder the investigative process. The best approach involves a commitment to transparency within the bounds of legal and ethical obligations. This means acknowledging the public's interest and providing information that can be shared without jeopardizing the investigation. It requires the officer to be knowledgeable about PPB policies regarding public information, Oregon Revised Statutes ORS, concerning disclosure of investigative details, and the ethical imperative to maintain public trust. By offering to provide general information about the PPB's role in community safety and directing inquiries to appropriate channels for specific case updates, the officer upholds transparency while respecting investigative integrity. This aligns with the PPB's mission to serve and protect the community through professional and ethical conduct, fostering a collaborative relationship built on trust. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the community member's concerns outright or to provide speculative or inaccurate information. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the public and can lead to misinformation, eroding trust in the PPB. It also fails to acknowledge the legitimate interest citizens have in understanding police activities within their community. Another incorrect approach is to offer specific details about the ongoing investigation. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Disclosing details of an active investigation can compromise its integrity, potentially alerting suspects, influencing witnesses, or leading to the destruction of evidence. This directly violates ORS provisions related to the confidentiality of certain investigative information and PPB policies designed to protect the investigative process. Finally, an approach that involves making promises about the outcome of the investigation or offering personal opinions on the case is also professionally unacceptable. This blurs the lines between an objective law enforcement officer and a biased observer, potentially creating a perception of impropriety and undermining the impartiality of the investigation. It also sets unrealistic expectations for the community member. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to policy, legal statutes, and ethical principles. This involves actively listening to community concerns, assessing the nature of the information requested, and determining what can be shared transparently and ethically. When in doubt, consulting with supervisors or seeking guidance from the PPB's Public Information Officer is a crucial step in ensuring appropriate action is taken. The goal is always to balance the need for public information with the imperative to conduct thorough and effective investigations. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Portland or Police Bureau (PPB) is facing a media inquiry regarding a potential ongoing investigation into a series of high-profile property crimes in the downtown district. The inquiry is specific, mentioning a particular type of crime and a general geographic area. How should a PPB officer who is aware of an active investigation into this matter respond to the media? Option A. State that there is no investigation occurring and that the PPB has no information regarding the reported property crimes. Option B. Confirm that the PPB is aware of the reported incidents and is actively investigating, but state that specific details of an ongoing investigation cannot be released at this time to protect the integrity of the investigation and ensure public safety. Option C. Offer a vague statement acknowledging that the PPB receives many calls for service and that all reports are reviewed, without confirming or denying any specific ongoing investigation. Option D. Provide specific details about the modus operandi of the perpetrators, the types of properties being targeted, and the current leads being pursued by investigators. The correct answer is B. Confirm that the PPB is aware of the reported incidents and is actively investigating, but state that specific details of an ongoing investigation cannot be released at this time to protect the integrity of the investigation and ensure public safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Portland Police Bureau (PPB) officers due to the inherent tension between the public's right to information and the need to protect sensitive investigative details. Balancing transparency with the integrity of ongoing investigations requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. Missteps can compromise investigations, erode public trust, and lead to disciplinary action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and protocol-driven response. This approach prioritizes confirming the existence of an investigation without divulging specific details that could jeopardize its progress or the safety of individuals involved. It acknowledges the public's interest while upholding the PPB's duty to conduct thorough and effective investigations. This aligns with the PPB's internal policies regarding media inquiries and the release of information, which emphasize discretion and the protection of investigative integrity. Ethical considerations also support this approach, as premature disclosure could violate the privacy of individuals not yet charged or implicated, and could alert potential suspects. Incorrect approach is analysis, releasing specific details about the nature of the investigation, the individuals being investigated, or the evidence being gathered would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This premature disclosure could tip off suspects, leading to the destruction of evidence or evasion of law enforcement, directly undermining the investigation's purpose. It also violates the PPB's guidelines on information release, which are designed to prevent such compromises. Refusing to acknowledge any investigation or inquiry, even if it is publicly known or being actively pursued, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach can be perceived as evasive and can foster distrust between the PPB and the community it serves. While specific details should not be released, a complete denial of any activity can be misleading and damage public confidence, potentially violating the spirit of transparency expected of law enforcement. Providing a vague, non-committal response without any attempt to confirm or deny the existence of an investigation, while seemingly neutral, can also be problematic. This approach lacks clarity and can leave the public and media speculating, potentially leading to the spread of misinformation. It fails to offer even a basic level of engagement that respects the public's right to know that their police bureau is responsive to concerns, even if specific details cannot be shared. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first consulting internal policies and procedures regarding media inquiries and information release. They should then consider the potential impact of any disclosure on the ongoing investigation, the safety of individuals, and public trust. A tiered approach to information release, starting with confirmation of an inquiry without details, and escalating only with proper authorization and when strategically beneficial, is crucial. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or public information officers is a critical step in ensuring compliance and maintaining professional integrity. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Portland or Police Bureau is experiencing a significant increase in overtime expenditures. A precinct captain needs to propose a strategy to manage these costs while ensuring adequate public safety coverage. If the average annual base salary for a sworn officer is $85,000 and the current overtime rate is 1.5 times the base hourly rate, with an average of 10 hours of overtime per officer per week over a 50-week period, what is the total annual overtime cost per officer? And what is the most fiscally responsible and operationally sound approach to managing this cost for the PPB? Option A. Calculate the total annual overtime cost per officer and suggest approving all overtime requests that are submitted, provided they are within the officer's individual overtime budget, to maintain operational flexibility. Option B. Calculate the total annual overtime cost per officer and advocate for increasing the overtime rate to 2.0 times the base hourly rate to incentivize officers to work overtime during critical periods, thereby improving response times. Option C. Calculate the total annual overtime cost per officer and propose a proactive strategy that analyzes overtime trends by unit, identifies root causes of excessive overtime, and implements targeted recruitment or deployment adjustments to address staffing gaps and reduce reliance on overtime, while ensuring compliance with PPB financial policies and Oregon state law. Option D. Calculate the total annual overtime cost per officer and recommend an immediate, across-the-board reduction in all overtime hours by 20% for all officers, regardless of unit needs or operational demands, to achieve immediate cost savings. The correct answer is C. Calculate the total annual overtime cost per officer and propose a proactive strategy that analyzes overtime trends by unit, identifies root causes of excessive overtime, and implements targeted recruitment or deployment adjustments to address staffing gaps and reduce reliance on overtime, while ensuring compliance with PPB financial policies and Oregon state law. Explanation. Benchmark analysis indicates that effective resource allocation is paramount for the Portland or Police Bureau, PPB, to meet its public safety mandate. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic planning and fiscal responsibility, all within the constraints of Oregon state law and PPB budgetary guidelines. Misjudging the cost-benefit analysis of overtime can lead to inefficient use of taxpayer funds, officer burnout, and potentially reduced effectiveness in other critical areas. The best approach involves a data-driven assessment of overtime costs against the demonstrable impact on crime reduction and community service delivery. This includes analyzing overtime trends by precinct and unit, identifying root causes of excessive overtime e.g., staffing shortages, specific crime surges, administrative burdens, and projecting future needs based on historical data and anticipated events. The PPB's financial policies and Oregon revised statutes governing public employee compensation and overtime would mandate accurate record-keeping and justification for expenditures. A proactive approach, such as implementing targeted recruitment strategies to address staffing gaps or reevaluating patrol deployment models, is ethically sound as it prioritizes sustainable solutions and officer well-being, while ensuring efficient public service. An approach that solely focuses on approving overtime requests as they arise without a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis is professionally unacceptable. This reactive strategy can lead to uncontrolled expenditure, exceeding budgetary limits and potentially diverting funds from essential equipment, training, or community programs. It fails to address the underlying issues contributing to overtime, such as understaffing, and can foster a culture where overtime becomes the default solution rather than an exception. Such a practice could also violate PPB financial regulations, requiring justification and approval for significant expenditures. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to arbitrarily cap overtime at a fixed percentage of base salary for all officers, regardless of operational demands or specific unit needs. While aiming for cost control, this rigid method ignores the dynamic nature of policing. It could lead to situations where critical investigative work or response to major incidents is hampered by insufficient resources, directly impacting public safety. This approach lacks the nuanced analysis required by fiscal prudence and could lead to operational deficiencies that are not justifiable under PPB policy or state law. Finally, an approach that prioritizes overtime approval based on seniority or personal relationships rather than operational necessity and cost-effectiveness is ethically flawed and professionally unsound. This creates an inequitable system, potentially leading to resentment among officers and undermining morale. Furthermore, it fails to align with the PPB's responsibility to allocate resources efficiently and effectively for the benefit of the entire community, as mandated by public trust and financial oversight. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve 1. Gathering comprehensive data on overtime expenditures, staffing levels, and operational demands. 2. Analyzing this data to identify trends, root causes, and potential solutions. 3. Consulting relevant PPB financial policies and Oregon state statutes. 4. Developing a strategic plan that addresses both immediate needs and long-term sustainability, including proactive measures to mitigate overtime. 5. Regularly reviewing and adjusting the plan based on ongoing data and feedback.